Guillermo, la charla tenés que darla en inglés porque como va a YouTube, así tiene mayor audiencia, ¿está bien? Estás muteado.
I was saying it's okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Leandro.
You're welcome. But I said that in Spanish. How did you understand?
Oh, I got the essence of it.
Okay.
Mainly, there was one word that was important, English. The rest, the rest I can infer.
Okay.
Una pregunta, ¿se ve, digamos, esta especie de sidebar con los contactos o las personas conectadas, o solamente ves website vos, Leandro, con fondo
No,
negro?
es una pantallita individual que cada uno puede minimizar, configurar, mover, etc.
Correcto, pero si la minimizás la tuya, digamos, no ves la mía, eso es a lo que me refiero, porque yo puse share
No,
screen.
no vemos
Ok.
la tuya y yo te mandé recién un link al streaming. Si lo cliqueas puedes ver exactamente qué vemos todos los demás.
Ah, chao. Súper interesante. Ahora tengo que encontrar dónde está el chat.
Te lo mandé a Slack.
Ah, con razón.
Che, Guille, ¿qué tal? Hay gente del exterior, así que creo que vamos a tener que empezar a hablar en inglés.
Okay.
Just to let you know.
Thank you, Hernan.
Do you want me to try with Internet Explorer 3 now?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I will share the link. Just wait. Don't be anxious. So tell me when I should start, right?
I think we can start.
Can we?
Yes. So let me just give a very short introduction. This is a very exciting talk to me because it's the first time I can see a presentation where the Smalltalk user interface can be shared across different machines and people all working at the same time on the same image. So I think this is something worth exploring. So please, Guillermo Amaral,
Okay.
your work, and we'll be giving the talk. Please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, my name is Guille, as Leandro said, and this is about what I call website. But first of all, I want to say that it has to do a lot with React, JavaScript library or framework that you might be aware of. So first of all, I will ask you, please do not react badly for bringing JavaScript stuff here. This sort of joke wasn't me, was this guy there called Giso. I promise I will keep him out of the presentation. But seriously, React is a JavaScript a framework, probably the most used framework during the last year. And it essentially applies the notion of a component as a building block for building web applications, where a component is essentially a piece of UI bound to a state. So the framework guarantees that a component is re-rendered once or whenever its state changes, right? So it was very interesting to work with this framework. Um, I wanted to give it a try to this framework mainly because I wanted to extend my uh, rather poor JavaScript skills, and also because there is the chance to apply or to use this framework, real stuff in my work. And so I started like the usual way to go with all this stuff, like reading documentation, following some tutorial. But it turns out that tutorials um, out there go from building a blog to building a blog. And in fact, I tried something called MERN, which is comes from MongoDB, Express, React, blah blah blah. But personally, I need a more interesting excuse to learn something. Um, so this is another stuff which I try, which is essentially a bunch of React components following the same style and some handy services. So I was saying that I recall I did, in fact, I did the blog first. But then I recall an exercise I made a couple of years ago while I was testing a framework for building web applications in Smalltalk. And the exercise was essentially this. In Smalltalk, every IDE tool is decoupled from the UI. So there is the possibility to instantiate, to create a class browser, for instance, and speak directly to it. So what I did was to implement an API for talking directly to these living tools within B, and replicated more or less the UI in a web browser, back then using AngularJS and Bootstrap for styling. It was a good exercise. But even back then, I thought about the chance of having a more basic, or yes, a flatter API to speak directly to the system, meaning that reflecting about the things in the system, like retrieving classes, methods, evaluating expressions, and so on. So I decided to go that way, meaning implementing, finishing this API, this raw API, and then pursuing something like this, like having a sort of IDE, or at least one of the tools based on this API in first in Smalltalk. So let's take a look at the main endpoints of this API. So I started by code endpoints, like the static part of the thing, right? So this is pretty much straightforward. Like for instance, an endpoint for retrieving classes could be all the classes in the system, or starting from a given root class, specifying the query. And then there is a representation, a JSON representation of the class, like for instance, the name, definition. Could be anything, but well, this is again the obvious way to go, I guess. So an endpoint for retrieving classes was the first thing that I implemented. And then, of course, dynamic, or yes, a parameter in the as a segment, specifying the name of a given class to retrieve the definition of such a class. And then continuing with this path, methods within a class with this endpoint. So here I have, for instance, the methods of fraction, and again with a representation of the method in terms of JSON, selector, category, source, blah blah blah. And finally, the last segment here to retrieve the definition of a given method, right? So this is basic. And then, of course, a way to retrieve variables of a class. Here, for instance, I have the variables, instance and class variables of fraction class. And they say essentially where they are or were defined, right? At what level in the hierarchy were defined. And finally, categories like strings. These are raw strings. So fine with classes, with the classes endpoint, and then these other endpoint methods to reflect or to query or search methods within my system. Like, for instance, if I want, if I only ask methods, I get all the methods in my system, but I can extend my request with the query to, for instance, retrieve methods with a given selector or sending a given message or referencing a given global variable. So implementers, senders, typical method searches could happen at the server side, so to speak, by means of this query. So let's go to the demo of this. So this is like the login page or sort of, because it doesn't ask me a password. So I'm specifying the URL of the target Smalltalk that I want to connect to. I have here the image open listening this port, so I will connect to it. And this is the website page or main page, or yeah, it's a could be a SPA, if you will. And here it says, okay, you are connected to the Smalltalk. Here I have a sort of transcript that tells me that this is the backend, so that there were a way of retrieving the dialect, which is B, and this is the address that I entered before. So consuming these endpoints, I could implement this, which is more or less the classical class hierarchy browser that you can find in any Smalltalk, where you can, for instance, search for a given class, and or let's go to magnitude, for instance. So I have here the hierarchy starting from magnitude. I have the variables, I have the categories, and I have the methods with more properties or attributes. Like, for instance, if a given method is overridden super implementer or things like those. So I can, for instance, select a variable and then a category for filtering methods accessing that variable. So these methods should be the ones that access this variable and belong to this category, right? This is more or less, again, the traditional class browser tool. And I would like to point out here something, that this exercise or this presentation is not aimed at promoting traditional ways. I'm not saying these are the tools or the yes, the tools that we should use, but they are in fact the actual tools we use. So this is not a final word, but this is a starting point. I mean, I'm aware that there are very interesting approaches like GT that could be explored, but again, this is like a starting point for doing more interesting stuff. But yeah, this is consuming the code endpoint. So for instance, I can search here implementers of a given selector, and then I can, for instance, search for senders of a given a selector, and there's some sort of highlight there. What else? I can go to, for instance, let me see if I can find a class or whatever. Yeah. I can go to, well, we can search directly references from a given class, take a little bit. I have almost 250 references to character class. So traditional way to work. And these are like tabs. These are arranged in the way of tabs, right? So everything is implemented on top of these endpoints, plus some caching, which is, I will speak a little bit later about this because it's another question that I have. How much should I cache? Because if I select here the method, right now, the client is requesting the method every time, so it could be cache. So I think that's it from the demo of this part. So the next, I think, obvious, or yes, I felt the temptation of implementing CRUD operations to modify. For instance, let's suppose that I want to delete a category. I could implement the CRUD operations on these endpoints. So delete method, HTTP method, could be used for deleting categories, as well as post to create a category, or put to modify. In the case of category, it would be rename a category, right? But several things about that. Yeah, it's not wrong. I could go that way, but the point is that changes in a system, a Smalltalk system, go far beyond CRUD operations, right? In fact, there is the notion of refactoring. Hernan, you know about this, which involves many changes potentially, right? So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that changes are already reified in everywhere. Most of these Smalltalks that I know have the notion of a change already reified, and also they keep track of the changes in order to allow the user to reproduce, to, I don't know, file out and file in changes and blah blah blah. So instead of creating or going the REST way, which is a temptation, I decided to use one single endpoint for applying any change in my system, which is this one, changes. I mean, for instance, if I want to create a class, let's suppose a point3D subclass of point, I can post this change. And if everything goes well, I can get this response, which tells me, okay, this is the actual change that was applied in your system. So I have now not only creating my class, but also I have register of this change in the changes system of my Smalltalk, right? The same for defining a method. In this case, I want to define a method point class. And of course, there should be a way of having a good feedback when something goes wrong. For instance, let's suppose that I want to define a method with this source, like x times and nothing else. Well, the API should provide me feedback enough so the client can inform the user, for instance, that were a problem, in this case, compiling this method, and the problem was in this interval of the code. And there are two properties there, suggestion and changes. And for instance, let's suppose that I want to compile this xz point with x times z. Well, the API should provide me feedback so I can do what most of these Smalltalks, the Smalltalks that I know do. Inform me, okay, I don't know what Z is. What do you want to do? Do you want to declare it as an instance variable, as a temporary variable, as a global variable? What do you want me to do? There is some interaction after I post a change. So suggestion is like human readable message or something like that. So the client can inform the user. I mean, the web browser can inform the user, and then the suggested changes are the ones that can be applied in order to whether the user decides to apply them or not. So, for instance, in this case, if the user says yes, well, define z as a temporary variable, well, the change to do that is the one that the client should send to the server, which is this, and then the thing will be fine. Okay, so going back to the demo, go back, for instance, try to do the same here. I don't know. So x, y, I can say x times y, and then compile this. So this is now compiled by me, and if I try to compile the same example of the presentation, I will get this. Well, by the moment it's a dialogue, I'm not happy with this. I don't like dialogues, but that's one thing. The other thing is that for the moment it only tells me or gives me the option of defining z as a temporary, but as I said, could be an instance variable with other suggestions. So this should be a list of options where I can choose what I want. So let's suppose that I say yes, okay. So the actual source code sent to the server to compile is now this. And again, I can remove a method. This method shouldn't be there. I can rename this method. Let's suppose that I want to rename, again, a dialog. So now I have a renaming. The same for a class. It can rename, it can create classes, remove classes, even adding, removing, renaming instance variables, moving variables from one class to another, etc. So there are like, I don't know, a little bit more than a dozen type of changes. these are well documented in the GitHub repo where website is stored. And but again, this can be extended. It should be extended. I mean, think of the great number of refactorings that we've been discussing during the last the last days. But the point is, another important aspect of this is at some point in time during this project, I realized that the emphasis should be put on the simplicity of this API in order to avoid or to to make it possible to port to any Smalltalk without the work being a pain, right? Okay. Every change, and of course, here I have, well, the list of changes that I made. For the moment, this is just a list, a long list. Well, it requires more work. I only can browse the class, cannot see, for instance, the current version against the change and reapply the change. Those are things that should be enhanced somehow. Let's go back to the presentation. So everything okay from the static side of the thing, but what about evaluations, like dynamic stuff? Like if I want to evaluate an expression and then get the object back, or the resulting object. So for that, I created this, which again is, I guess, a straightforward way, an endpoint for posting evaluations. And the evaluation has this, and I guess, two more properties. The first is the actual expression that I want to evaluate. And then if I want to pin it or not, with pinning being the way to keep a reference at the server side in order to avoid the GC to collect the object and lost the reference, because there is no way to track the reference from the client, right? So this is the mechanism to have a reference at the server side when we are inspecting, for instance, an object at the client side. And the other one is sync of course, coming from synchronous evaluation, meaning that I will wait for the evaluation to happen in the server, and then I will get the response. In this case, I have this rectangle created, and I have an ID. That ID is not important if I'm not pinning, like I'm not in this example. But if I pin the object, that's the ID that I should use in the future to refer to that object from the client, right? And of course, there is the asynchronous evaluation, which is the I guess the most interesting flavor, because this gives control to the client. So, for instance, implementing control break, or essentially finishing or canceling an evaluation, or I don't know, providing some feedback. I mean, the client shouldn't be in pause until the evaluation finishes, because of course the evaluation might take a long time to finish. So once I have this ID, I can use it to retrieve this object, as I said before, and the evaluation is finished. Let's suppose I apply some polling technique in order to see or to detect when the evaluation finishes, or I have another synchronous endpoint like this that will stay until the evaluation finishes. So this endpoint allows me to retrieve this object, and this gives me all the objects already created and pinned in the server. And the interesting part is here. Let's suppose that I have this object, I have this ID, this ugly ID there, and it tells me, well, this is a rectangle. This is the print string, or yeah, the version of this object. ID is not correct. This ID should be this, right? This is previous version of IDs. But the interesting point is that I know that the class is rectangle, so I can get the variables of a rectangle, which are origin and corner, and then I can use them as a segment in the URL to get to dive to traverse the object graph from this root object that I have pinned. So I have here a point, which is the corner of my rectangle. Again, the ID is not correct there. So this is essentially a way I found to implement the inspector at the client side. So let's go back to the client, and let's open a workspace. So if I create 10, 20, corner, I don't know, 30, 40, and I can print the evaluation, the result of the evaluation. This will use this will not pin the object because well, I only want to print the evaluation. But if I inspect by clicking Control I or using this embedded inspector, I will get the inspection of an inspector on this object, which is pinned. And as I said before, these dynamic paths in the URL are used to retrieve, to navigate within this object, which is a rectangle, has an origin and a corner, right? And the other interesting part about evaluation is that here I want to have some scope, right? Some, I mean, some context. I guess I name it context at the JSON level, but evaluations might also specify the context in which I want to evaluate them. So for instance, here, I want to self to be bound to what self is, I mean, the rectangle. So if I show this, this variable, I see that it's bound to the rectangle. Moreover, if I have origin, so this is, again, all of you are aware about this. I mean, if I say, for instance, instead of 10, let's say 26, and evaluate this, I press Control G here. I go to origin X and it's 26, right? So nothing more than just having the scope specified from the client, so the server can instantiate a compiler with that scope where origin, corner, and self are bound to what I want them to be bound. What else? So this is more or less evaluations. So let's go back to the presentation. See what, well, finally, not finally, but yeah, but I guess this basic API should finish with these endpoints, like the chance to create a debugger. What happened with I try, for instance, um, I try to relate these expressions like 26xxx. Well, it is unlikely to be implemented. So what I got is an HTTP error again, describing that something went wrong with some description, but more importantly, again, the evaluation IDE, with which I can create a debugger. I mean, the server has, evaluations in the end are processes, forked processes in the server. So I have here like a suspended process um, um, on which I can create a debugger. So using the evaluation ID, I can tell the server, okay, I want to create a debugger on this process, on this evaluation. So the server will say, okay, in this case, nothing interesting in the response. And then what I can do is to, for instance, talk to this debugger to retrieve frames or context, if I name them contexts, in BR frames. So for that reason, I use the word frames. And what I can do is, this is entirely not REST. Uh, yeah, I'm sorry. Frames, for instance, I can restart this debugger at this frame and get this new frames list. Let's go to the example here. So now let's suppose that I don't know, I want to let's go to
Guille,
yes.
Guille.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. You have a question here by Gilad that says, so error stack is implicitly pinned?
Yes, and I included the stack. The stack is I started by cutting the stack so the user. I mean, in this Smalltalk, we have the stack once an error happened, right? And then there's the option of debug the process or not. In Faro, you jump directly to the debugger. So I don't know if I am answering your question, but the stack is partially explicit in the response of in front of a conflict, and you can get it because in the end you will have the process, the suspended process on the server.
Right. So the question is, that's all fine if I want to debug it, but otherwise, do they just pile up? Do I have to clean them up manually? Because if they're implicitly pinned, every time I have an error, there's this process hanging around there.
Okay. Well, currently it depends on what the client does. I mean, speaking about the API, yes, you should end or terminate the process by hand. I mean, once you get this, you have a living process suspended in the server side, and nobody will drop it unless you tell through an endpoint, which is delete expression, blah, blah, blah. Yes, there is a potential risk of having suspended processes in the server.
Okay, sure. I just wanted to understand. I mean, do you have like a process manager or So some Smalltalks have like a tool for keeping track of these, and they do tend to pile up if you're not careful. So it's quite similar, really.
Yes, yes, I know. And the same happened with the objects. I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking about uh, uh, denial of access attack. I mean, I can, yeah, scale the server by creating objects and not pinning objects until the server. There is no mechanism currently to prevent those situations, but yeah, it should be considered by the server. So, sure. For instance, let's suppose I evaluate this. I get the debugger, and I can speak to this debugger by, for instance, step over, step into, everything, step into, and again, the context is the context here is if I select, for instance, self, and I print it, I have point class, right? And I can evaluate. So the bindings x as 1, show it, right? So x being x 30, x, well, it lost what I wrote. So now I have not only a process in the server, but a debugger created. And the debugger dies when I resume here or terminate here, and the expression dies as well, right? So let's do that. What else? In front of an error, let's suppose this. Again, I have here the usual debugger. And one interesting part is that I was thinking about that. I was discussing this with Valeria, that the ways that some Smalltalks filter context or frames, cut the stack at some point, avoiding the user to because if I, for instance, step over and over and over and over, I can have here stuff that comes from I don't know, the website API itself, right? If I don't filter that. So yeah, but those are, again, details. And the exercise is very interesting because I had to go to every debugger. I tried with a few Smalltalks, but to see how they manage stacks, processes, etc. Right? And it's very interesting exercise. So, well, that's for the basic endpoints of a basic API. In the case of Smalltalk, I went a little bit further and implemented 2 IDE tools more, like for instance, let's suppose I have a test, a test class, in this case, day test. I can run the tests and see, well, this test run very fast. But I have here 16 tests, they all pass. But now let's modify one of them, like, yeah, this one, and rerun the suite again. I have here 1 failed, 15 passed. And if I filter here the one that failed, I can debug it. And again, this is the usual way to go in Smalltalk. I can recompile this, and I can resume this. I mean, there is one more step to take that I couldn't, or I hadn't the time to do, but I had to rerun manually the test. In this Smalltalk, this doesn't happen. I mean, once I debug and compile and resume the test that I'm debugging, I mean, the test runner realizes and removes the failure. And so test runner is the other tool. And the other one, I can run even a test, isolated test. It passes. And the other thing that I found interesting was, let's suppose that I want to profile a an object. So I want to profile an expression. So it might take a little bit. The cursor should change. It's not changing. But once I have the result, I mean, this again sends an expression to the server, creates a profiler on that expression, runs the profiler, and then there is a way, there are some endpoints to or used to retrieve results from this profiler, right? Which has one of these ugly IDs. So here I have I put a flame chart because I really like this chart more than the traditional tally. In the end, they are all the same, but this is I found this more beautiful. And again, I have here the profiling information. And if I click one of these bars, I get here down there the method, corresponding method. And of course, the ranking, again, clicking on, this is the whole expression, but if I click here, for instance, add method, order collection add method, 41% of the profile time, right? So these tools are all implemented in B, but let's go back to the presentations, and see, well, having reached this point, well, from the beginning, I thought it would be interesting to try implementing this API in other dialects. So I started by Faro because, well, is I don't know, closest, not in terms of closest to B, but we usually go to Faro to see how they implement something. And I personally, I do it before going to Dolphin or to, I don't know, other Smalltalk Squeak or Quiz. I'm sorry, Juan. I don't know if you are there, Juan.
No, he's on vacation.
Okay. Well, so what I did was, well, I have here Faro. Faro is not running Windows, at least the last 10 times I tried. I couldn't. There's an error. So I have here a Faro running on a virtual machine, a Hyper-V. So I will connect to Faro. So now I have the same in Faro. So I implemented the API except for just runner and profiling in Faro. So again, if I go here, I can see magnitude in Faro. Should have a comment. They comment everything. And okay, this is Faro, right? And the same tools. I can search, for instance, implementers. So the same API, the same tools. I can evaluate, I don't know, and factorial, evaluate that, or right there. And have here, well, the same debugger can restart, can do everything that I can in B Smalltalk. By the same price. No, not the same price. I had to implement that API in Faro. And one thing that I didn't show, let's inspect this object in Faro. So here I have like the objects created. I mean, the pin objects in the server, and I can unpin them. It's like a manual way to drop a reference of these objects, right? So there is no cleaning policy at the server side, but yeah, there is a way of killing them, or yes, dropping references from the client side. And then I only for having fun, I did the same for Dolphin, but only code endpoints. So I have here the chance to, well, magnitude is my favorite class. This is Dolphin, right? So the same. And finally, I found, I don't know if Mariano is there, but I asked him VA image. I found a trial image of Vast, and I implemented again code endpoints. So I have the same for VA, right? So let's go back. So this is one of the potential benefits of having this IDE. I mean, can be used to access different dialects. And the other one is the obvious one. I mean, having an IDE in a browser accessing to an image could allow multiple users working on the same image, right? So let's suppose that let's go back to B and go to Microsoft Edge, but let's get out here. Let's start from the beginning with user A. Yeah, user A. And here from another browser to the same with user B. So I have now B and A working against the same image, right? So if I go here, I can see A, I can say, hi A. Well, this is a tiny chat that I implemented, again, following some tutorial and using WebSockets. But could be enhanced in multiple interesting ways, like sharing code, links to the code. So let's suppose B goes to some class, I don't know, OS process, and goes there and implements IND, BBB, I don't know, and tell look at BBB, oh, and it should be nice if A can directly click on this and go to OS process BBB, things like that. But for the moment, go to OS process, and what you expect is to see BBB implemented by B. So I can modify this by saying A, and then if B goes now to the same, it is not refreshed until I click again. This is one of the pending interesting things to explore, like real-time coding. I mean, live editing or something like that. So a couple of words about the code editor. I use CodeMirror, as I said before, but there is this option. It's newer. This Monaco editor is the editor that Visual Studio Code uses. And it requires, of course, some sort of grammar, Smalltalk grammar to work, but it could have, I guess, more benefits over, or more benefits than Cold Mirror. But Cold Mirror is nice, right? But it has yeah, it's a little bit the grammar for 3D printing. I mean, for 3D printing functionality has some drawbacks. I mean, the way they um, make it has some drawbacks in terms that sometimes pre-dipping is not what you might expect. So again, this is a quote. A long time ago, I was discussing my thesis work with Leandro, and one of the things he said that I remember until these days is it's way much more important the questions brought by a project that the answers it might give, right? So this experiment or this project has this benefit, I would say, that bring to the table questions that are interesting or at least are worth thinking. Like, is it possible to have a common? Well, possible might be, but during this exercise, I found myself trying to define the minimum common features of, for instance, a given tool like a class browser. It should have this option, but this, if you go to, for instance, BA or even Faro, they have a lot of options. That, yeah, well, that's not that important, so we can get rid of it in a common IDE. So the common part has this challenge of, well, what are the common features, right? And the following question is, or the following thing to think about this is, yeah, forget about the common set of features. Should have a way to define a feature, to extend a feature. For instance, going back to this Monaco editor, it has a way to extend, to define commands, user commands, and shortcuts, everything that some of you really like. I mean, the benefit of having such an ID related to allowing multiple users working on the same image at the same time. And related to that, for instance, I thought about students working on an image where the teacher can supervise what they are doing, or I don't know, yeah, without the need of being in the same place. I mean, I'm not saying anything new with this. I mean, we are, and currently these days we are, remote mode most of the time. So this could be a benefit. I mean, but again, I don't know if this scales up to more than just a few people, a few users. And the other interesting part is, what about the things that I can do, I would be able to do? Because again, I can browse, modify, debug, whatever, but real stuff like development implies UI. And I am in a browser, so if I am developing, about to develop a web application, it might be very useful. I remember Amber, for instance, combining the power of Smalltalk with the accessibility of the browser. I mean, JavaScript world. So in HTML and CSS or whatever, I can, for instance, implement something like a preview of my web app in the same browser, but not native widgets, no morphs. I thought about library kernel as an alternative to have something from that interesting world like morphs. But and this the third question is I have an answer for that. I mean, it's not bad to have the IDE written in JavaScript, and the main reason for that for me is that JavaScript community is huge, and for instance, one of the things that we should think about this IDE is improvements in terms of performance. But I found myself struggling with the speed of a tree view, and then I went to I don't know, Stack Overflow, whatever. I found not one, not two, like a dozen of alternatives of a tree view, and I replaced that for a faster or fancier tree view. So this is really, I mean, I was amazed about that. I mean, as small talkers, we all want to have the chance to modify everything, to extend the IDE, to modify everything, even the IDE. So having it written in JavaScript might be an impediment for that. But on the other side, I found this is a bright side, because provided I can encourage JavaScript developers to work on this, I can have amazing things written in my
Guillermo.
IDE features. Yes.
So about this, David has a question. David, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Sure. I was just going to comment that I would say that you probably should consider doing the IDE using Pharaoh.js, where you can access all those libraries and so on, but you can write in Smalltalk. I have no idea how big your code base is, but that might be a very reasonable way of doing it.
Yeah, could be a interesting option or exercise. It's not that big, the code base. I mean, I don't have the numbers here, but I have essentially a component with the average lines of code of all of them. It's like 200 or so, and I have like one class, one component for every tool, like class browser, the inspector, debugger, and parts of them, because again, React is like you have the class tree with the options of the class tree. So I can give you the numbers, but yeah. And the other exercise I wanted to do was to consume this API, aside from website, consume this API from GT, because GT has a straightforward way to consume an API and reflect on these API. So in that case, I would be reflecting on a Smalltalk system from Glamorous Toolkit. So yeah, could be another interesting thing to try. But yes, for JS, it's an option.
Guillermo, there is another question by Gilad. Gilad, please, could you ask the question?
Sure. So the collaboration stuff is cool, but of course there's it's kind of interesting to do the comparison to something like Croquet, where they have sort of totally real-time interaction across, districts. So that's a huge project and a very different approach. And what you're doing is probably more practical for a lot of people and has the advantage that you just use your web browser. But it is interesting to look at that and see the comparison, and if you get your stuff to be a bit more like that, more live, more interactive, as you sort of mentioned. So it's just a comment more than a question.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm aware. I'm not aware of a real case of, where multiple users work in a, I don't like this word, but in a more productive environment, like behind a real project. But yes. This is another thing that I try. I mean, these editors come with different panels, or 2 or 3, I guess. So one of the things that can be implemented easily was, and I tried, was to connect the same instance of the same website to different backends and compare code. And this comes from the fact that I usually do this by hand. I mean, I bring code from another dialect and see the difference. And well, implementations, be Smalltalk on top of web applications framework. This is fully implemented. This is the first implementation of the API together with the client, because I was developing the client and developing the server at the same time. And then Firewall, everything except profiling and testing endpoints, and Dolphin, all the endpoints related to code, as well as VA, all the code endpoints implemented. And thanks Gallego for the HTTP server. I had to add the routing, dynamic routing of requests from DE, and the same for VA. I took this as HTTP server support. Well, where to get the stuff? This is already published, public, and these are the URLs. Website is the client, the React client. B website's not public yet, but and Fire is public. And I didn't upload what I did for VA and Dolphin. I will share that, I guess, in the next stage. And I want to thank especially to Fran, that helped me a lot, gave me support, discussed a lot of things with me. Leandro, of course, which again, he not only says interesting things, he helped me a lot, and he heard me. Gashe for this HTTP support, or HTTP server, web server for Dolphin. And special thanks to Anita, to Anne, and why should be the translation, AY. They created this website logo, which is very nice and interesting. Thanks for that. So thank you all, and if you have more questions or comments, I would be glad to respond here.
So yes, if anyone has a question or a comment or anything, please unmute yourself, please, and ask.
So one of the things, since you're using React, one of the things that does for you is that it's actually a reactive UI. If you were to do this in Smalltalk, I'm not aware of a reactive UI that's actually in Smalltalk. Excuse me. And on the other hand, it's sort of core to the Smalltalk philosophy that you can sort of understand the whole world in those terms, and the fact that you have this pile of JavaScript is sort of unfortunate. And of course there are all the huge practical advantages of the speed and performance, and that they make it reactive and all that stuff that you can leverage, which is hard to compete with. But there's a trade-off there, and it would be nice to see Smalltalk instead.
It would be nice to see what?
It would be nice to have all this in Smalltalk instead, right?
Okay. The other way around. Okay.
Can you just show the URLs again, please? So
Yeah. Sure.
Well, paste them in the chat. Then
that would be excellent.
Yeah. There you go.
Thanks. Very nice.
Okay. If we don't have any more questions or comments, we can.
Sorry, I have one last one.
Okay.
One question. Yeah. Can you show how to send messages to objects? Did you already show that?
I showed how to evaluate an expression. We can, for instance, if
So maybe my question is, let's say you have a pinned object, right? Can you send a message to this object using, say, other pinned object as argument?
not by the moment, but it would be possible. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if it is useful though.
Yeah, but yes, it would be interesting to try that.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome, Javi.
Okay, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Guillermo Amaral.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Nice work. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.